go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us. I am Mrs. Smith. I'm the College and Career Specialist at Northwood. It's nice to see a few familiar faces. Thank you so much for being here. Please have your camera on if your camera is working. We would like to see your face, and have your microphone muted. We will be recording this session, so just so you know that. And questions are encouraged. You can ask questions throughout the presentation. You can either send them in the chat and then I'll get it and I'll read it out loud for the doctor, and or you can unmute your mic and ask a question of the doctor during the presentation. So we can have questions and answers at any point in any time. All right, so Dr. Sanjay Shrivastava, I know I messed it up. I got close. He's got a BA in Materials Science and Engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology and a PhD in the same field from the University of Florida. He's been working in the medical device industry for the past 20 years on developing and commercializing cardiovascular medical devices. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Doctor, and let you go ahead and start presenting.
Excellent. All right, good afternoon, kids. So you've probably seen a few of these career presentations from various people where they talk about what it's like to be a lawyer, an accountant, an engineer, or a doctor. And what I'm going to do is, instead of telling you about a specific profession, I'm going to tell you about a specific industry, a medical device industry, which actually employs people that could be in sales, doctors, veterinarians, engineers, scientists, allied healthcare professionals, lawyers, accountants, everybody, MBAs. So this would give you a perspective of some of the real life work. And also later on, I'll talk about, first I'll tell you what I do, what this industry is about and what I do. And later on, I will tell you how I got there, because I think it's maybe more interesting for you to know about the industry than about how I got there. Okay, and please feel free to stop me at any time. I prefer it that way to make a useful time for you. This is for you. So anytime, stop it, and whichever way, just unmute yourself and ask questions or send it to Mrs. Smith. So medical devices, the term medical device implies that anything that's used to diagnose or correct a disease. Now, of course, there's medicines that correct, so that's the pharmaceutical industry, and there's biological solutions, that's the biotech industry. And when there is a mechanical or electrical gadget that corrects a disease or diagnoses a disease, that's typically a medical device. In its simplest form, a syringe is a medical device. And in more complex forms, you know about hip implants and knee implants and stents for heart, etc. So that's all medical device industry. Big MRI machines, CT machines, those are big diagnostic. Ultrasound, those are big diagnostic industries as well. I'm showing a few pictures here, and I spent last 20 years in a specific subset of medical device. So there's medical device industry that deals with, contact lenses and ophthalmology, and here Irvine is world's biggest hub in ophthalmology. There are devices that treat diseases in the heart and brain, the cardiovascular disease, and that's where I spent my 20 years, and Irvine is also a big hub actually for that. So I'll spend most of my focus on that. But then there's orthopedics, like the hip and knee implants that I talked about. Then there's the cosmetic device industry, and so on. There's dental, and Orange County also is a major hub for dental device industry. Let's see. I can move this going forward. So first I'm going to talk to you about some diseases, and then how devices serve those needs. And then we'll talk about what we do. And then I'll talk about how I got there. So here is a picture. What you see is a condition of a stroke. And what happens in stroke, funny that nowadays, your generation is much more informed with internet and stuff, but my generation, you'll still see people who don't know whether a stroke is in the heart or a brain. Stroke is always in the brain, and what it is a piece of clot goes from somewhere else and sits in an artery in the brain. And arteries do what? Arteries carry perfused blood, oxygenated blood to the rest of the brain, so brain can continue to function. So when this clot goes, it blocks oxygenated blood supply to a part of the brain, and whatever function that part of the brain that was controlling that function stops. And that's people sometimes, if they're not treated quickly and properly, then they could end up being paralyzed or end up losing their vision or any movement in half of the body, entire body, etc. Speech. So it's a pretty devastating disease that affects hundreds of thousands of people in the US and millions of people around the world each year. Then another type of, so that's called acute ischemic stroke, that a clot goes from somewhere else. Then there's aneurysms in the brain, which is this little balloon-shaped stuff on the side of the artery where blood goes and starts to fill into them, and they can rupture and cause what's called brain hemorrhage. So I'll talk about how these things can be treated with devices, and how devices not only can treat them, but in the last 10, 20 years, devices have disrupted and developed newer ways to treating these kinds of diseases. Okay? All right, so next, and then there's another disease or condition in the brain called arteriovenous malformation. Now, similar to brain, heart is an important organ, and most of you know that there's 2 ventricles in the heart and 2 atriums in the heart. And atrium to ventricle, you have the blood flow. Right side has deoxygenated blood, and left side has oxygenated blood after it came back from lungs, and it pumps. So there's a number of diseases. Heart disease is one of the most common diseases. There's a number of diseases that occur inside the heart and outside the heart, mechanical problems and electrical problems, both. So I'll talk about mechanical problems, that these valves that really, like this, open and close, open and close. That's how they allow blood to pass when it's in systole, and then they allow blood to deposit when it's in diastole. With aging, these valves stop to function. And there could be a number of, again, reasons for that, a number of different ways they stop to function. But the replacement of these heart valves was figured out right here in Irvine by a company called Edwards Life Sciences. Actually, Edwards, who was a World War II engineer, he created the first surgical where you cut the valve open and implant the valve surgically. Now, in the last 20 years, what we have done is found a way to treat this valvular disease instead of surgically, and that's a chart that shows the different types of diseases that occur inside the valve and how they stop functioning. Instead of surgically, you stick a needle at the groin and travel all the way without opening the heart or opening the person's chest. You replace the heart valve or repair the heart valve. So that's a major, major breakthrough and major contribution to how healthcare is delivered. Not only this affects the economics and how patients are treated, patient care, but it also affects the specialties that render the care. Up until then, when these transcatheter methods were developed, surgeons used to have to cut the heart open, and now cardiologists can treat them. People who used to prescribe pills, they developed a new specialty called interventional cardiology that evolved, and interventional cardiologists can do these complex procedures. So that was the disease inside the heart. Then outside the heart, there are these arteries that carry the blood. So heart pumps blood to the full body. There's about 5 liters of blood in the body. And there are arteries that carry that oxygenated blood on the heart itself. So the pump can keep working. That's the battery to the pump. Now those arteries get clogged or get blocked, basically. And this is a different type of blockage than the clot blockage that I talked about in the context of brain. This is the cholesterol that keeps depositing at one location, and it becomes like this. And then there's no more blood going into these arteries, and that part of heart stops functioning, called heart failure or heart attack. That's the most common way heart attack is created. So the way, again, for this type of things, up until 20 years ago, what people had to do is break the ribs, cut the heart open, and go inside there and take a vein from somewhere else in the patient. And through a very, very complex, hours-long procedure, they will sew and try to create an artery, hoping that the patient's life can be saved. Now we can just stick a needle at the groin and travel there with a little metal mesh thing that I'll talk about in a second, called stent, and put the stent there, inflate it, so this artery opens up more and keeps the blood flowing for some more time. So these pictures, and most of these pictures, I took it from the internet, at least first half in the presentation, and I don't have rights to them, but just so you know, they are intended for this purpose to share with the students. So what the doctors do, instead of doing a open procedure, they are looking at these types of screens here, where they inject a little dye in the arteries, a contrast medium, and that contrast medium lights up X-rays under an imaging modality called angiogram or fluoroscopy. And they're looking at these images in the computer screen here, and then snaking these teeny tiny catheters that are really 0.5 millimeter in diameter or 1 millimeter in diameter. They'll snake all the way from groin to the heart, or groin to the brain, or groin to the bottom of the leg, to then treat whatever plumbing problem that has been created. Any questions so far? So we're talking about eliminating major surgeries to treat these devastating diseases using what's called minimally invasive procedures, like a needle at the groin and then travel all the way. It's almost like a drive-through heart surgery or drive-through brain surgery concept is what we are talking about, very close to that. So now in the second slide where I showed those diseases, I'll give you examples of how we created these new solutions. So I was the head of R&D for creating this particular product here. It's a stent-like product. What it does is travels from groin all the way into the brain inside, using those angiograms as roadmaps, and it can pull this clot out all the way out to the groin. And that's called a minimally invasive procedure, and this has given rise to a new type of products called stent retrievers. Likewise, in brain aneurysms, instead of surgeon having to open the skull and putting this type of clip to treat the aneurysm, we could just from inside go and fill these little teeny tiny metal coils, or put a stent-like product here that will then obliterate the flow going into the aneurysm, thereby keeping it from rupturing. So, and in the context of heart disease, the valves that I talked about, so they can put a valve like this just using a catheter. They will use these straw-shaped catheters that will go again from groin to the heart, inside the heart. You don't have to cut the heart open. You don't have to put the patient on the bypass surgery or anything. Patient can go home in a couple of days, and they can put this transcatheter heart valve, or outside the heart stents or balloon inflated stents. So these are the types of products that have evolved pretty much in the last 20 years. They didn't exist prior to that. And so in the course of, if you work in this industry, again, in different functions, I'll talk about some of the day-to-day things that we do there. We collaborate, because these types of solutions, engineers can't develop them alone, or doctors can't develop them alone. Engineering and doctors have to work together. They have to collaborate, where doctors describe the problem, engineers come up with some solution, they try with each other. They may try in benchtop models of the body, they may try it in animals, and then they keep refining it until they get it right. And when they get it right, then they validate and verify and work with the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, the US government body, to get it approved. And once the products are approved, then we have to train lots of doctors and get the word out. So this is the, for marketing purposes, we go to these conferences where there's lots of, many of these are, again, doctors that are listening on how to do these, because you are developing new procedures. So they are not taught at universities yet, even post-medical school, where they are getting trained for these high-end specialties. They have to go to these cutting-edge conferences where the new solutions and new treatments are being talked about and being developed from peer-to-peer, from physician to doctor, as well as from industry to doctor, where industry is training these doctors on how to use the products correctly, and which type of patients can be treated with these products or not. And again, lot of this type of benchtop models that we will create hands-on. This is a prominent doctor that's trying it himself, and there's many other people like these types of sessions that we hold in different parts of the world. These pictures are taken from here and there around the world. Same thing, we collaborate a lot within, because the healthcare, once you create a new solution, and US has been at the forefront of this, then you have to get those solutions out to patients around the world. And there's, regardless of the economic situation of the country, generally the disease states are very similar and patient population is somewhat similar. And lastly, when products work well, when we get the regulatory approvals, when lives are being saved, patients are being saved, we celebrate our successes. So now let's talk about that. What's the method internally? Of course, at the forefront of it is the development, research and development. Like I said, talking about with doctors, working and watching engineers go and watch procedures. Engineers would then create models for those procedures and try to iterate on the procedures and the devices, so they get a bit easier. Then we have a clinical and medical affairs function, which actually takes these products and puts them in a clinical trial. When you create a solution, you have to demonstrate to the satisfaction of the government of any country, and all countries have their own regulatory bodies, that this procedure is safe and effective. One is not enough. Generally, you have to demonstrate that it doesn't create another problem, and it does the job that it's intended to do. So for that, generally what we do, what's called clinical trial or clinical studies, where we take medical device industry. Clinical studies are of the size of few hundred patients, 100 to 500 patients for the most part, where we would demonstrate that this new solution, the stent that we put in the heart, is going to be at least as good as or better than the bypass surgery that you do. If in bypass surgery, the mortality rate, let's say, I'm making it up for your just general information, let's say was 10%. And then we started to put stents, and we said, well, our mortality rate is only 0.2%, but our complication rate is 2%. And in bypass surgery, it was much, much more. So it's safe. Now, it's safe, but is it actually effective? That when you put a stent in someone's heart, are they going to live 5 years or 8 years or 20 years, right? And versus the bypass surgery that we did, what was the average lifespan? So through clinical studies, we demonstrate that the overall risk to benefit is in favor of the new device. That's when the new device gets approved. So anyway, so that's the clinical and medical affairs, where we employ, we'll employ medical doctors, we'll employ biological sciences people, or people with any sometimes even in allied healthcare professional background, where we and then we have regulatory affairs, which what they do is they take all this information from that engineers developed and tested the products and made it work. Then they'll take and submit it to the notified bodies or controlling government bodies around the world to make sure that they get the approval. And people, what kind of background you need to work in regulatory affairs? Generally, any type of, sometimes they have business degrees, sometimes they have engineering degrees, sometimes they may have medical degrees, they may have law degrees. Sales and marketing, generally, being able to influence people, having a good vision for marketing, having a good strategic mind. Quality, we have to make sure that the products that we produce, they actually do the same job over and over and over again, that we don't have a lot of complaint rates. And that's what quality does. There is systems in place to be able to do that. Manufacturing, of course, they make tens and hundreds of thousands of these products once they are developed. And there's engineering that goes into manufacturing. Engineering scale up, they have to do cost reduction over time to make sure that they are produced with decreasing cost over time. So those are some of the main functions. And of course, we have the accounting and finance and legal and human resources and those shared functions as well. So what do you need to study? If I'm at this point looking at in high school, that what do I want to do? What do I want to be with my life? The good news about this industry that you could almost, study a variety of things and still be functional and working in this industry. We employ, mechanical engineers, biomedical engineers, material science and engineers, electrical, chemical engineers, computer scientists, physics, chemistry majors, biological majors, biostatistics we use a lot in clinical studies. And then medical sciences, like I said, we have MDs in various specialties. We have a space for nurses, allied healthcare professionals, technicians, technologists, veterinarians, And last but not least, everybody doesn't have to study sciences or engineering to get a job in industry like this. We have lawyers that may not necessarily have an undergrad in science or engineering. They could be liberal arts majors. We have marketing people who may have an MBA, may have a business degree, may have an engineering degree that they found their way into marketing, or a liberal arts background that did an MBA to eventually find their way in marketing. So the point is that you could really study whatever you can relate to, whatever you like, and then find ways in different industries and different functions. Of course, we do employ a large number of engineers, if you look at relatively speaking, and it's probably easier to get in if you have studied science and engineering than with liberal arts majors. But my point was that everybody gets employed in this type of industry. So now my background, right? So I did a bachelor's, master's, and PhD in engineering. I came from India after doing my bachelor's and did a master's and PhD here. After my PhD from University of Florida, I actually initially it was in material science and engineering, and everything is made of materials, so I could work across various industries. Semiconductors were very hot at that time, automotive industry, so I went to work for automotive initially. And then a few years later, I found out about medical device industry, and it looked really cool. And that's how I looked for a job in medical devices after about 5 years of work in automotive, and then found a job here in Irvine in medical device industry. And that brought me from the East Coast to Irvine. And in medical device industry, the various functions that I showed you, I've worked in many of them myself. I worked in research and development, developing several very nice products, stent-like products, heart valve products, some of these cerebrovascular products. And then I also worked in automotive. I had some manufacturing experience, and I worked for about last 10 years, I worked in marketing or business development functions. When I was in engineering, I worked in, I created a medical device conference. I have 30 issued patents, another 20 filed, and numerous international patents, all in cardiovascular medical devices. So the good thing about this industry is that you feel the impact. You affect patients' lives around the world. If you, no matter what function you work in our industry, you get to see these procedures, some functions more than others, and you have that sense of gratification that what you're doing, you're helping patients and people feel better. So with that, I think that's what I wanted to share with you, and I want to open it up for any questions that you may have.
So go ahead and put any questions that you have in the chat, or you can unmute your mic and ask them.
Yep. Either way is fine. I prefer interaction, so no worries. You could ask me about, what people do from different functions, how different functions get into, how different majors get into different functions, or simply about these diseases, or who treats them, or how solutions are developed or evolved, or patents, or any of that stuff.
I have a question about like companies in Irvine. Like I've heard of Edwards Life Sciences, the major like biomedical like engineering company, but like what other companies, like specifically Irvine, Southern California? Because like you mentioned Irvine is like a hub for medical devices. So like what other major companies are there?
Yeah, excellent question. So there's Johnson & Johnson, and that's based near Irvine Spectrum. Johnson & Johnson is a very large company. People know it as a baby oil, baby shampoo, consumer products company, and that's about 20% of Johnson & Johnson's business. About 40% is pharmaceuticals, and about 30% of Johnson & Johnson is devices. So a large part of medical device business, almost $10 billion revenue business, is run out of Irvine, is headquartered in Irvine on the other near Irvine Spectrum area. And they have a vision business based here. They have a cardiovascular business based here. Cardiovascular specifically, I talked about mechanical disease. There's also electrical disease. Actually, there is electricity that flows in the heart. That's how the heart works as a pump. And that electricity, sometimes that goes haywire, and the heart, instead of beating regularly, it starts to go very, very irregular, called cardiac rhythm issues, arrhythmias in the heart. And the pioneering company for arrhythmia in the heart is a Johnson & Johnson company called Biosense Webster based here. So that's second company, perhaps larger in size. So Johnson & Johnson's revenue that's based out of Irvine is of the order of $10 billion. Edwards Lifesciences by itself is about $4 billion in revenue. Then you have Allergan that's based in Irvine as well. Allergan is into this Botox and cosmetic stuff, but also multi-billion-dollar revenue. More, I'd say, a little bit of medical device, more pharmaceutical side of it. And then you have Boston Scientific has operations in LA area, a good size operation. Then you have Medtronic. That's neurovascular headquarters for Medtronic are here. Medtronic is the world's largest standalone medical device company, and Johnson & Johnson Medical Device is the second largest medical device company. So you have two of these based. Then you have Canon. Canon has a medical device business that's also in Irvine. Then you have Alcan. Alcan is a ophthalmological company. Allergan also has, by the way, some ophthalmological business there. Then you have Massimo. You have Applied Medical that's based here in Orange County. So most of the large companies. Abbott has some operations in LA area. San Diego is a big hub for biotech, and Orange County, and also the Ventura County, a little bit in Ventura County, but mostly in Orange County, you have huge medical device space. Did you have question on any specific company or medical device type?
Not really. I was just like looking like where I could get an internship for, like at which like biomedical engineering.
Yeah, any of these. I think the larger companies have very structured program where they have a cutoff time on when to apply in November, December time frame probably is the cutoff. The smaller company, and there's a whole bunch of startup companies, by the way, too, that have, that are started, have few employees, few tens of employees, and there may be more flexibility if they're willing to take you. So.
Thank you.
Sure. Other questions? Comments? Okay.
So I had the opportunity to take a group of students to Edwards Life Science, and it was fascinating, the work that they do over there and the devices that they are manufacturing and hand sewing. I mean, some of them, there are lines and lines of people just sitting and hand sewing the devices. And so it occurred to me that there was, as you said, room for a lot of different kinds of people in different kinds of careers.
Yep. Absolutely. And we can arrange for a tour at Johnson & Johnson when world gets back to normal, widgets and stuff if needed. Yeah.
That would be great. So if you don't have any more questions, there is a very brief survey we would like you to take, just based on feedback from the presentation. But while you're doing that, maybe think of some more questions that you might have. I just dropped the link in the chat, so if you could please take a minute to fill out that survey, that would be great. Be thinking of some more questions. Do you guys have any questions about engineering specifically, or kind of the pathway or any of that? Maybe what a day looks like for you, doctor? How about that? What does a day look like?
I have a lot of variety in my own day. So on a typical day, it may be lots of meetings for me, a lot of Zoom calls these days with other entrepreneurs, other startup companies that talk to me, that pitch their companies to me to our company, Johnson & Johnson, for investment or acquisitions. So I talk to other entrepreneurs or other companies a lot. I also talk to doctors around the country, around the world, to either get their opinions on some of the products that we may have, whether they have used it or they are going to use it, or they can use and give me feedback. And then internally, we have a lot of discussions with different functions. So that's kind of my typical day if I'm not, and I travel a bit, once or twice a month as well, when in the normal times. And traveling is either to medical conferences, to hospitals, to visit with the doctors, or to visit with other companies for other collaboration or acquisition or investment opportunities.
Great. So we have another question. For a high schooler looking to enter this field after college, what advice would you give?
When you are in college, then internships become a little more real. I think it's better to look for assistantship. The internship in your after your second year and third year, and the internship actually is a great way to get your foot in the door. Then you start to familiarize yourself with what this industry is about. People that the company that you work for, they start to familiarize with you, what your work style is like, what your strengths are. And that's a great way to then, when the opportunities arise, when you graduate, then for you to get a full-time position. So pursue internship in college when it becomes a bit more real. In high school, I think people may have mixed feelings about high school interns. Though some of you are very capable, but then we have to find, the company has to find time to invest in you, and some companies may be more willing to do than others. So of course, it's never too early from your point of view, even to try in high school, but definitely in college. Okay.
I have another quick question.
Yeah.
There's like a biomedical engineering, do they focus more on the research side, or does it focus mainly on like research and development, or actually like making the device?
I'd say mostly development, mostly product development. When you work in the industry, as opposed to like pharmaceutical or even biotech, where the research side may be a bit more heavier, where you are, and research is you're trying to understand some mechanisms, underlying mechanisms, versus product development is where you have a clear intent that this type of surgery, they do it this way, and if I could have a little tool that makes them do their job easier. So those tend to be more product development focused, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering. Some of these electrical devices, like I said, they're electrical too, otherwise mechanical materials, engineering type things. And the bigger and more established a product gets, the smaller the piece that you would do as an early career engineer. And when they are, just trying to create something totally new, then you get to do more.
Thank you.
Good question. And by the way, you don't have to, one of the myths that people have, to work in medical device industry, you don't even need to study biomedical engineering or bioengineering. Those are good disciplines. We employ just as many mechanical engineers or maybe certainly mechanical or materials engineers as well. Sometimes electrical, if it's a electrical side of things, devices. Okay. All right. Back to you, Mrs. Smith.
Okay, if there's no more questions, I'm going to put the survey link in one more time. If you all would please fill out the survey, and we will select a student for the raffle. We have some cool gift cards, so go ahead and fill that out. I'll give you a couple more minutes. Well, I'll give you 30 seconds. How's that? Thanks so much for attending. Thank you, Dr. Shrivastava. I appreciate you being here. It's really good information and very clear and concise presentation, so we really appreciate that. So thanks, everybody. We're going to go ahead and end our presentation. Hopefully you will join us next week. Be looking for the advertisement for the Pursue Your Passion program for next week. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hi, Rachel.